Hello, everybody. Um, we have a test on Tuesday, and so there's a couple of things I didn't get taken care of, so I'm gonna try to get that taken care of, so that if you're wanting to study now, that you can study, because I didn't get everybody a review sheet. So if you look right here, there's the review sheet. Didn't get them printed out on time. Copier wasn't working, ran over there, blah, blah, blah. I apologize. But there it is. So you can look at it now. So if you're wanting to study this weekend either, sometime, there's the review sheet. Plus, if you look down here, we got to Great Awakening. We didn't get those long too. So first off, let's take a look right there. There's the long. There's going to be a long essay question and given at some point or another, either the day of, in which case the grading of the test will take a little while, or I may split it up and give you the test and then give you this for homework. I hadn't decided yet. But at any rate, we need to practice with a long essay. So make sure you can do this. Compare and contrast settlement of New England, Chesapeake colonies. We've talked about it. Come see me if you're concerned about it. But you also have these two topics that I want to cover very, very quickly. It's the fourth heading that we didn't get to on Friday before fifth period kicked in. So if I go over here, here it is. Let's see if I can hit presentation and it comes up. Normally it's pretty good about coming up. So there it is. All right, colonial achievements. There's a slave poet, not like the first poet in American history, colonial history. It's this lady named Phyllis Wheatley, and her poems are interesting. I need to talk about them in class. I just looked them up the other day, but she had two of them I read, and one of them talked about and made the argument that slaves were better off over here, that slavery itself was bad, but life in the colonies was ultimately better than life in Africa, and because slaves had the opportunity to be exposed to Christianity, which they wouldn't be exposed to in Africa, and so a lot of slave owners are later on going to make that argument. That's interesting. And then she also writes a poem about rape, rape of slave women by slave owners, and mixed race offspring from those situations. So she's hitting some controversial topics. So I'm not surprised that the textbook says, well, there was this poet named Phyllis Wheatley. You start reading what she was writing. She was writing some controversial stuff. She was hitting things you wouldn't really expect somebody to be touching on when she's doing that writing. All right, less controversially, we got Ben Franklin and the lightning rod. I believe we mentioned that last time. Philadelphia's got the first library in the colonies. There's newspapers being printed, especially up in New England. The education level is fairly good. So you had newspapers in the colonies, including Ben Franklin's. I believe he called it. He was writing out of Philadelphia, but I think it was called the Pennsylvania Gazette. I think he used the colony name rather than the city name. Okay, there's a court case. It's like our first freedom of the press court case, and very relevant. We know from our first day of fifth period that the freedom of the press is one of the freedoms of expression that is protected in the First Amendment. So you had this fellow Zinger. He writes an article in New York that's really critical of the royal governor of New York, the guy in charge of the New York colony, on behalf of Britain. Says the guy's corrupt, just trying to enrich himself or something like that. So he gets thrown in jail. When he gets thrown in jail, there's a trial, and so he's accused of libel. Libel is the crime of saying something bad about a public official. And you say, well, wait a minute, I thought you could say things bad about public officials. Certainly, newspapers say things that are critical of President Trump, and newspapers said things, that were critical of President Obama. But it wasn't a sure thing back then. So he gets thrown in jail, and then his lawyer, this guy named Hamilton. Now, it's not Alexander Hamilton. The guy's name's James Hamilton, no relation. But Hamilton, the lawyer, says, yeah, but it's true. What Zinger said is true. He's not lying. He's not making up stuff about this guy. So if the article's true, he doesn't get in trouble for it. You can't get in trouble for telling the truth. And so he got off. It's the short. So that's the Zinger case. I don't think this word comes from this case, but we have this word that I believe is spelled Z-I-N-G, or a zinger. If you're having a debate with somebody and really get them, we would say, you really roasted them. That's called a zinger. So I don't know. I don't think there's a connection between those words. I need to look that up. But it's the Zinger case. It's the first case in American history, colonial history, that's about the freedom of the press. All right. There were 4 types of colonies in terms of their structure, economic and governmental structure. The first 2, or kind of the first 2, Jamestown, Massachusetts Bay, were founded by a joint stock company, the Virginia Company. Remember the Pilgrims kind of got blown off course. They were headed for Virginia. So then you have self-governing colonies, the ones that broke off from Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut, for various reasons. Okay, proprietary colonies. According to American Pageant, these are the ones. Proprietary, you're talking about one person. So Georgia by, the first 3 straightforward. Georgia by Oglethorpe, Pennsylvania by Penn, of course, Maryland by Lord Baltimore, then New York. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be, the Duke of York is the guy on that one, but American Pageant is categorizing it as proprietary. And eventually, there's going to be a clampdown on the colonies, and so all of the colonies are going to become royal colonies, just being run from England, and that's going to create tension closer to the Revolution. But those are the types of governmental setup for the colonies. Okay, and then, hey, we got Ken Bone here. We have this system of self-government. You got this thing that I don't believe, maybe we've said, salutary neglect. It's the idea that sometimes neglect is a good thing, that, if a parent has a little baby, they're supposed to change their diapers and take care of them, right? But if a parent has a 25-year-old child, son, daughter, the parent kind of needs to let the young adult do their own thing, make their own mistakes. So it's technically neglect if the definition of neglect is that, the mother, the father, the parent, the original, whoever's in charge is kind of leaving the other folks alone, but it's the kind of neglect somebody needs in order to develop. And so salutary neglect was, Britain would kind of turn its head when it came to smuggling sometimes, and Britain would kind of let the colonies do their own things. Okay, so the self-government in the colonies, all the colonial governments had something like what we call Congress, something like what Britain calls the Parliament. That's bicameral. It's got an upper and a lower house. In Congress today, the Senate is the upper house and the House of Representatives is the lower house. In Parliament, the upper house is the House of Lords. The lower house is the House of Commons. Not everybody got to vote in the colonies. You had to either be a church member if you're up there in New England, or the farther south you are, the more economic qualification is going to be. You got to have a lot of property. You got to be well off. So your former indentured servants, generally speaking, not going to be able to vote. Okay, there's various versions of this self-government. The first self-government in the colonies was Virginia House of Burgesses. Sounds like, it's like the House of Commons, like the House of Representatives, and elected representatives, including, eventually Thomas Jefferson, I guess most famously, are going to be members of the Virginia House of Burgesses. The Mayflower Compact, that's the written plan for government that the Pilgrims signed, very theocratic, the word God appears in there, but it's the first written plan for government in colonial history. The New England town meetings we mentioned, that's where, common people are going to the church and they're solving problems. Our old buddy from the town meetings last year, Ken Bone, was the star of the town meetings from the presidential election of 2016. So he became famous as a result of a town meeting style debate based on these New England town meetings. In Connecticut, like the Pilgrims, ends up with a written plan for government. So that's the written plan. Okay, written plans are the different all the colonies are kind of similar in structure. Then you have a variety of particular instances of this governmental structure. All right, and then finally, let's go ahead and say that, again, not everybody had the right to vote. You kind of had to be one of the elite in one way or another. Either you're, a church member, or you've got some land. So half of white males didn't have the right to vote. However, it wasn't very controversial in colonial times because they were kind of hoping they would get some land, and then they'd have the right to vote, and they were kind of okay with the Thomas Jeffersons and George Washingtons and, Winthrops of the world making the decisions for them. All right, so it really wasn't democratic by our standards where everybody is supposed to have a say-so, but it was more democratic than it was in Britain, more democratic than it was in Europe. So it's a step towards democracy. Okay, so there's the matching there. When I do this, I like to take a break, and so you can pause it and match that stuff up with each other. I'm going to hush for a second. And then I'm going to show you the review sheet. Okay, there it is. So I don't know how. I wonder if I can make it bigger. So there's the whole thing right there, so you can see it. If you're on a regular size computer screen or on your phones, it probably looks pretty little. But if I was to make it bigger, let's see what happens. So far, I'm 200%. Look at there. So then I can just kind of go up and down, and you can see it. So there's the top right there. And so there's the long essay. And so there you see we've added the Zinger case and then the last thing, self-government there, those various forms of self-government. So I'm going to go up right here. You can look at all that, take a picture. Y'all know way more about things you can do with your crap shooters than I do. But, there you have it. That should say, you know what that is, verses. Okay. So I'm going to speak generally about this stuff, and this is the way you want to be able to speak about it. I'm not sure if this is the best kind of review sheet for tests where you've got to draw conclusions from passages rather than just, some specific Trivial Pursuit kind of question. There'll be both kind of questions on the test. My plan is to have some regular old multiple choice questions as well as the questions in the multiple choice format that you have and that long essay question, that right there. Okay? All right, so let's start right here. So we're talking about, this is chapter 1, right? These first ones right here. So what? The Latin American tribes, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayas, and their advancements and, also their troubling practices, the human sacrifice, the fact that they had empires who, they were defeated by, the Aztecs by Cortez and the Incas by Pizarro. Remember, the most advanced of the North American tribes with the Pueblo, they were able to settle down, start growing corn, maize first. You remember corn, beans, and squash are the top 3. The mound builders were here. Hey, let's put that word Cahokia. Remember we put on the board biggest city, Native American city in North America. It's where St. Louis is today, and the mounds had religious significance. The Iroquois are the fun ones. Remember, they're the mooks. Let's do that. Nope, can't type. Still can't type. Dang it. Mooks. All right. Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga. Let's turn that into a C. Cayuga, remember? All right, and then S right there. All right, the Portuguese explorers are Diaz and da Gama. Spain's going to get united under Ferdinand and Isabella, and they're going to start exploring for a number of reasons. They're curious. The Renaissance had taken place. Power and money. There's financial gain to be made. They've united. Unity is an important thing. They kicked out the Moors. So you've got a number of reasons there that's going to allow them to go exploring. What is it? The Catholic thing. The Crusades. If Catholicism was going to spread, it had to spread west. You couldn't get to Asia. The Muslims were in between. Also, the challenge of the Reformation. The Protestants are challenging Catholicism, so Catholicism wants to spread in another direction. All right, you need to know some dates. I think dates are a good thing for us. A lot of our essay questions will say, "Hey, between these 2 years, what happened?" They're going to ask you some question, and you need to have a feel for that time period. So there's no one date that's the perfect one to know, but you need to know a bunch of them. So here's our first 6. That's Columbus. Hey, let's add 1620. Want to 1620? So that's 1607 Jamestown, 1620 Plymouth. 1630s, Massachusetts Bay. This is a good one. 1676 is Bacon's Rebellion. And it's also the King Philip's War, 1675, 1676. So troubled times come to the colonies in the late 17th century. Might be 1693 here. I can't remember. 2 or 3. This is Salem. All right, so more trouble. All right, 1733 is Georgia. It's the founding of the last colony. Okay, so there's your colonies. So again, this is just kind of this founding period. So yes, we say specific things, but also some general things. Okay, so the Columbian Exchange, going back and forth. The food basically: tomatoes, potatoes, corned beans, squash, peanuts. All that stuff that's basically healthful from the Americas to Europe. And then the Europeans bring the disease is a big one. Livestock is the other one, big one. Gold and silver. I'm sorry, that goes the wrong way. What is it? Coffee and sugar, and chocolate and vanilla. Those are the other things. But the big ones coming towards the Americas are the harmful things. So the effect of it, if you get some graph talks about population, hint, population of America is going down, population of Europe going up. Triangular trade, we've seen it a couple of times now. That's the route that the goods and people take from the Americas to Europe to Africa. The Middle Passage is the slaves coming to the Americas. Henry and Elizabeth, so what are we going to say here? British colonies getting started here. So Church of England. So England's got to unite. Drake is the pirate, right? The sea dog gets chased all over the place, but then Elizabeth knights him. So Spain gets mad, and the British have a war with the Spanish Armada, battle with the Spanish Armada, 1588. I hadn't put that one in there. Let's put it in there. You want to? Kind of a turning point, kind of like 1676. And then you got Roanoke, the lost colony. Walter Raleigh was founder. He comes back from getting supplies, from fighting the Spanish Armada, Croatoan, the work. 3 groups leaving England. Up in New England, you're going to have the religious groups, the Pilgrims and the Puritans. But down in Virginia, it's the poor farmers, the enclosure movement, and the rich farmers, the rich primogeniture guys, but that are the younger sons. Virginia Company is a joint stock company. It's coming in 1607. That's where they're located, Chesapeake Bay. It's malarial and it's a nasty place. It's on the water there, so it's easy to defend from the Powhatan. Smith is the political leader. You don't work, you don't eat. Remember, they were lazy and thought they were going to get a bunch of gold and silver like the Spanish. You have the story of Pocahontas kind of saving John Smith from Powhatan. Powhatan's trying to show that, we're tough. You don't want to mess with them. John Smith gets called back, so, they start, they quit working again. They're starving. You got the cannibalism story there. Lord De La Warr, that Delaware's named after, comes in and imposes order. And the economic hero of the place is Rolfe, who introduces tobacco to it. Tobacco's big time. It saves Jamestown, but it ruins the natives because you don't need them anymore. The colonists don't. And then also slavery's coming from it because it's labor intensive. So first you're going to have the servants, and then you're going to replace them with slaves. All right, you know what indentured servants are? Then, it's very tough and not quite as bad as slavery because eventually you can get your freedom, but a tough life. They're going to end up being seen as troublemakers when Bacon's Rebellion comes along. Powhatans, the 3Ds. All right, disease, always. Disunity, always. That's a recurring thing for our Indian tribes. And in this case, disposability. The settlers don't need them. The Jamestown settlers, these are not pilgrims, these are not Puritans. Jamestown settlers, for economic reasons, don't need them once they have tobacco. All right. 1619 is another date. All right, that's the date of the Virginia House of Burgesses, self-government in the colonies for the first time. Also when the first slaves were introduced. All right, so then we're going to other places, right? Working our way around the colonies. Okay, Lord Baltimore's founder of Maryland, proprietary colony for Catholics, but it's a tobacco colony. So the result is a lot of indentured servants come, and they're all Protestant. So it ends up being a Catholic minority colony. So in 1649 is going to be the year. Let's put that. Yet another date. What did I do? I don't have any dang sense. All right, here we go. There we go. Oh, well, any idea when that happened? Okay, there we go. 1649, I believe, is the year of that. And so that's going to be the year of the Toleration Act. I should put that right there. And the Toleration Act is kind of tolerant. It's tolerant of all Christians, Protestants, Catholics, not so much of Jews and atheists. Although I believe narrative history said it's death penalty in theory for Jews and atheists, but in fact nobody actually got it. But, they're not tolerant like real deal Rhode Island or almost real deal Pennsylvania. All right, North Carolina. Well, we found out in the last thing, one of the biggest colonies, kind of a magnet, a pull factor for the farmers that can't make it, former indentured servants, that thing. Scotch-Irish, your common man southerner place is North Carolina. We said that NASCAR and bootlegging kind of born there. South Carolina. Big rice plantations, really big-time inequality. The very richest people in the colony is going to be in South Carolina. Stono Rebellion is going to be there, the worst of the slavery, highest death rate. They got to keep important people. Slave codes, because if you're a slave in South Carolina, you don't have much of a reason to be cooperative because you're going to die pretty quick. So these slave codes are They're slaw laws. How about that? They're slave laws. Restricting freedom outside the workday. They can't meet at night. They certainly can't have a gun. Slave preachers are a little suspect. It's coming out of the Stono Rebellion. All right. Charleston is your port city. Very culturally tolerant, but very much dependent on terrible, terrible slavery. So kind of a strange place. It's going to be, is there an opposite colony of that? Oh, yes. I mean, but it's a strange place because you have this tolerance alongside the slavery. All right, Oglethorpe's the founder of Georgia. It's for debtors and a buffer. Originally it's this noble experiment. They call Pennsylvania the holy experiment. I think they call Georgia the noble experiment. And there's going to be no slavery, and you're helping out the folks who are struggling. It doesn't work out. Nobody wants to move there. Savannah's so very close to Charleston. People move to Charleston instead. Had more, whites there, going to have more freedom to do what they want. And so he's got to back down on all these prohibitions. All right. So then you're moving up New England. Should I stay or should I go? Pilgrims are the ones who settle in Plymouth. They're separatists. The Puritans are staying in the Church of England, trying to reform it, purify it, make it more like a real Protestant church, less like the Catholic Church. William Bradford is our political master of things in Plymouth. He's the guy who got elected, what was it? Was it 30 times? A whole bunch of times. Governor. All right, Squantum, Massasoit, the two guys, according to that little squiggly line, I hadn't spelled his name right, who helped the Pilgrims survive the first winter and are responsible for the first Thanksgiving ceremony there. The Pilgrims signed the Mayflower Compact, religious self-government. Massachusetts Bay, 1630. It's the city on the hill. This one's the Puritan one. It's going to be the most successful one early on. Winthrop's going to call it the city on the hill. He's their political leader. I got to stop and breathe a second. Okay, I get dizzy if I just talk and I forget to breathe. Let's see. It's the perfect place. According to Winthrop, for the whole world is watching to see if we're going to be this perfect place, this city of God, really. And so it's democratic. They're going to solve their problems in the town meetings, but it's not tolerant. So Ann Hutchinson and Roger Williams get kicked out. She's an antinomianism. Antinomian kind of means against the law. She's a law unto herself, like Martin Luther King's going to be, like Henry David Thoreau's going to talk about being. And she also, I didn't say this in class, she kind of argues, hey, Puritans, you say it's already been decided, but you're trying so hard to be perfect. Y'all are kind of Catholic-y. It seems like you're trying to earn your way into heaven. So she enrages them on a bunch of different levels. So they kick her out. She goes to Rhode Island for a time, dies in New York. Had a lot of kids, remember. New Hampshire, just folks leaving for land. Rhode Island is for these. So Thomas Hooker is founder of Connecticut. He's a Puritan minister. All right, these two things, New England Confederation, the Puritan colonies, not Rhode Island, when Maine was a colony, not Maine, are going to form their own little self-government. But then there's going to clamp down on it in the Dominion of New England, and they're going to take away self-governmental rights. That's going to be unpopular in the colonies. So kind of a little foreshadowing of the 1700s tension after the French and Indian War. Pequot War is the Pilgrims burning out all the Pequots. Big massacre. Bradford saw it. He was troubled by it, but on the other hand, he said God gave us a big victory. So then King Philip is going to try to unite all the tribes against New England, and he ends up with his head on a stake, like the leaders of the slave revolt down there in South Carolina, the Stono Rebellion. All right, sorry, I got to stop and breathe. Let's see. All right, pretty close. All right, so then you get your middle colonies, Pennsylvania. They're the Quakers. They get all fired up in church. Everybody's equal. They call themselves Society of Friends. Anti-slavery, pro-Indian, anti-preacher. That's elitist. Persecuted. They were weird in England. So in the textbook, we say all the nice things about them, and it is really nice. I like the Quakers. Having said that, they were against air, so they would, I was reading in this other book, they would walk around naked, in London and walk into town meetings. The book I was reading said they would rub poop on themselves. If fancy clothes are elitist, well, then the most anti-elitist thing you can do is not wear any clothes at all and be dirty. And the dirtiest thing you can do is have, poop on, and they would rub poop on themselves and walk into a public place. And so, we can then understand why people thought they were weird. I'm not sure that justifies the persecution, but, they're not quite as Martin Luther King-y as the textbook suggests, at least to start off with. Then they kind of evolve in that direction. All right. New York is the economic colony, right? The Dutch were economic folks, traders. It's very diverse. It's going to be taken over by the English, by James, the Duke of York. Hey, Henry Hudson was the guy who settled there. New Jersey and Delaware, both Quaker places, but they're kind of the junior colonies there. New Jersey run by New York, Delaware run by Pennsylvania. Lifespans. All right, so that gets us to our last little thing there, right? Or no, we got a couple chapters in American Pageant. So you live longer in the north, you live shorter in the south, and the southern heat doesn't kill the bugs, the northern heat does. Family life, better family life, more intact families up in New England. There's not near as many women down in the south. Let's see. Bacon's Rebellion is going to be the indentured servants getting put out there on the edge of town where the Indians are, and they get led by Berkeley, Common people led by this guy who'd been rich his whole life against what they see as the elitist Eastern government. Going to be the first instance of really kind of the Trump revolt in a lot of ways. And it only ends when Bacon gets sick and dies. But the result of it is, the government decides the servants are too much trouble. Let's start bringing a more reliable labor force, African slaves. So they're coming over on the middle passage. We've talked about how brutal that is. A third or a fourth of the people would die on the way. Sharks would follow them. The movie Amistad's about that. Very, very, moving movie. Very well done movie. Slave culture. We said the more slaves, the more African the culture, the less European the culture. The less slaves, the more European the slave culture, the less African the culture. We tend to act like, sound like who we're around. I've got a pretty hardcore Southern accent, even though I was born in L.A. and lived in Texas for a time. Having lived in Rome, Georgia, and grown up in Rome, Georgia, and taught in Dalton and taught in Calhoun for a time, just very deep South accent. So, I sound like who I've been around for the last 20 years. Okay, we mentioned the Stonewall Rebellion. That's the South Carolina Charleston Rebellion, first rebellion in colonial history. Big time crackdown on whatever slave liberties existed as a result. Going back up north, the halfway covenant is, the Puritans are lowering the standards for the next generation, got something of a generation gap, making it easier to be a citizen and vote in the town meetings. Kind of controversial, and the older folks say, hey, it's not good to lower standards. It only lasts for a little while. Salem witch trials, you got, it's also up there in Massachusetts, and you got the teenagers getting in trouble, and so they're accusing kind of single elite ladies of being witches, and if you say you're not, they spaz out in the trial, and the parents are concerned for their kids. So for a time, everybody believes them. It can be compared to the 1950s McCarthyism. If you stand up for somebody accused of being a communist in the 50s or being a witch in Salem, well, what do? They say, well, you're a witch. So it was very hard for people to stand up. It's hard to take a stand. Remember that. It's brave to take a stand. But guess what? You're still supposed to do it. But it's going to hurt. And it hurt the folks in the 50s. It hurt the folks, the folks who took stands got accused. That guy, Giles Corse, the guy who said more weight when they kill him. He's noble. It didn't turn out good for him in this life. Let's see. They pressed him to death. You remember? Okay, what do we have? Okay, so then let's on the last chapter. You got all these immigrant groups. The Africans, the Scotch Irish, and the Germans. Then you got a list of 9 immigrant groups there. The Scotch Irish are very cantankerous, I'll say. They didn't make it in Scotland. They didn't make it in Ireland. They came to Pennsylvania, started attacking Indians. So then they moved to the frontier, and they're illegal immigrants their whole history. That squatter area, they're taking land that hasn't been ceded by the Indians and work down their way to the frontier and illegally immigrate to every southern colony. All right, so the ultimate illegal immigrants, and, they don't really assimilate too much. They kind of shoot their way into whatever the place is. And their descendants become the NASCAR drivers and the rednecks and the McKenzies and so forth. The Germans, a cuter story, much more peaceful folks, and so they kind of they move to the Quaker state, but they come the Amish, and, they hold on to their traditional ways, and, even today, they don't not just use crap shooters, but any other, there's still horse and buggy technology is bad for you. All right, you got all those other groups, so you got a list of them. Colonial occupations and economics. Remember, the doctors weren't any good. They would bleed people and they'd kill more people than they save. Preachers were respected, lawyers kind of suspected. You got the First Great Awakening, that is Whitfield, who inspired Ben Franklin. Do I have Ben Franklin on there anywhere? Good gracious, let's get him on there and put Ben Franklin, the first American. Rags to riches story, and he becomes a printer. He's got Poor Richard's Almanac. He went to see Whitefield. You know, he's an Enlightenment thinker. So that Great Awakening is a response to the Enlightenment, and especially to deists. The notion that God is the divine watchmaker, but then he's not a part of our lives. And so Edwards was sinners in the hands of an angry God, and Whitefield, starting in Georgia, working his way up, starting an orphanage in Georgia. All right, and then we're back down to what we said. The Zinger case is the freedom of assembly case. And Zinger gets off because his lawyer said, well, what he said was true. If what he says is true, you can't throw somebody in jail for it, for printing. And then self-government, the different forms of self-government. The town meetings, the Mayflower Compact, the fundamental orders of Connecticut. Virginia House of Burgess is the first one. All right, and there's a long essay. And remember now, when you write it, whether you write it on Tuesday or maybe you write it Tuesday night for homework on the next time and it'll just be a daily grade, hadn't decided yet. Maybe that format. Use that formula, X, however, A, B, therefore, Y. Okay, that's it. Wonder how long that took. No telling. All right, let's go over here to, where do I go? I can't remember. This way, and I think what I hit is this.